this is what Payday 3 could look like, but odds are you're used to it looking more like this. And the reason for this is very, very simple. This isn't a trick with graphic settings or anything. There's only one setting that is being changed here, and that is anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing is largely responsible for removing a lot of the life from the visual style of Payday 3, and I find this super fascinating because the only way to see these full city glows that you would kind of, I don't know, you could argue as to whether or not it's realistic, right? As to whether or not this looks realistic, but I think it's inarguable that it makes the city look more like a city. It makes it look more fleshed out, more bright, more vibrant. The only way to get this style, to get this look, is to play without anti-aliasing enabled, which is really weird. You can kind of replicate this look with Intel XISS or ZES, or however it's called. That only gets you so far of the way there, and the look kind of breaks down a bit when you start moving the mouse, although the default anti-aliasing settings, or I guess the lack of anti-aliasing settings which give you the full glow, also do the same thing, and it's equally as bad, if not worse, because of how much brighter it is. So you could argue that Intel XISS is an improvement. The same thing also happens with the upscaling settings as well, but the upscaling settings have their own issues. Well, it happens with all the upscaling settings except for NVIDIA image scaling for some reason. Despite that, the other upscaling settings, or all of them actually, have one major issue, which is that they don't do anything. That might sound like I'm exaggerating or lying or something, but I promise you, try this yourself. Go in-game, find a nice spot to stare at something, turn on upscaling, turn off upscaling. You will get the exact same frame rate, or at least that's the experience that I and a couple other people have had with it. I can't think of any other game where upscaling literally does nothing. Maybe there is one, maybe I'm just, you know, maybe I'm unaware, but from what I could tell, upscaling typically increases your frame rate, which it does not do in this case. You could use any settings you want, any upscaler you want, and it will not do anything. Intel XISS, NVIDIA DLSS, AMD FSR3, we'll come back to AMD FSR3 in a minute. Now, I also want to quickly talk about frame generation, because frame generation has its own weird quirks. If you turn on DLSS, you lose the VSync and NVIDIA reflex settings. That's kind of strange that it doesn't let you see what's happening, but it's even worse when you realize that it turns off boost. If you had NVIDIA reflex plus boost turned on, and then you turn on DLSS frame generation, good job, you've just turned off boost and you can't turn it back on. There is no way to have DLSS frame generation and reflex boost turned on at the same time. But weirdly, if you use AMD's FSR3 frame generation, reflex comes back and you can turn on boost for some reason. It's really strange. VSync doesn't come back, but VSync is forced on as well. However, I don't think VSync is forced on for DLSS frame generation, it's only forced on for AMD frame generation. And something that you might not realize if you've ever toggled on AMD frame generation, it actually changes your anti-aliasing or upscaling, I don't remember which one, to AMD FSR3, and you cannot turn it off. You might be thinking, oh, but look, if I go down to AMD upscaling, I can turn it off and still have frame generation, right? Well, if you go back up again, you will see that turning off AMD FSR upscaling also turns off AMD FSR frame generation, and there is no notification of this and no warning about this, it just does it. The only way to know this would be to actually pay attention to it and see it happen for yourself, and if you're not paying attention, well, yeah, if you've ever turned on FSR frame generation without noticing, or just by clicking through the frame generation options to see what they were, and you don't want to use AMD FSR upscaling, you're gonna have to go back and change that. And if you've ever turned on DLSS and you wanted NVIDIA Reflex plus Boost, well, you can't do that. It would be nice to have some improvements to the menu. We had this UI rework, which didn't really rework any of the UI at all, it just changed the appearance of it. That's besides the point. We had this UI rework, I think it'll be nice to see an improvement to quality of life, to functions within the menus next, maybe. I can hold off on a HUD rework if it means the UI becomes more functional and explains what it's doing. It explains what it's setting all your settings to when you change things, because as of right now, the game does an awful job of explaining what the fuck it's doing, and that really needs changing. I wouldn't be surprised if some people have changed one of these settings without realizing that it changes other settings, or turned on upscaling, you know, expecting it to actually do something, when in actuality it doesn't do anything, other than make the visuals worse if you're using like image scaling with performance mode. Like genuinely, image scaling with performance looks awful, especially if you turn up the sharpness, but it doesn't change your frame rate at all. It has no effect. It just makes the game look worse, and I don't understand how that's possible. If you've changed some of these settings recently, I would recommend just going through, double checking them, because they might be set incorrectly because you weren't told what it did. And if you want to try playing without upscaling, I would recommend it, because genuinely, like, in my experience and other people's experiences, it doesn't do anything, and I would recommend trying that out for yourself, see if it does anything for you. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But for everyone that I know that has tried it, absolutely no effect. You're probably better off just playing without upscaling in that case.